Uh, Namaskar, everyone. Today is the I think first of the series of lectures which Jijit Nambudri ji will be Nadamuri ji will be giving. Jijit Nadamuri ji is a former scientist of ISRO. Currently, he is focused on the research on Veda, Itihasa, Purana, especially on the Mahabharata. He has published around 6 research papers on the subject and presented the same in international conferences. He has also created a high-resolution Bharatvarsha map, and these are in public domain since 2004, used by several sites, including the Wikipedia. Hundreds of sites focused on Dharmic civilization and Indic civilization have actually used that map. He has created a website, Ancient Voices, with 25,000 pages on Veda, Itihasa, and Purana, where some of these maps are hosted. Additionally, as an artist, he has depicted several scenes from Mahabharata and Ramayana in the form of paintings and 3D animation. AR/VR experiences used to illustrate Dharma to schools and college students. I have had interaction with Jijit for now last several years without ever seeing him through the Facebook and WhatsApp and other places. In particular, he's member of a very distinguished scholarly group called IHAR, which discusses primarily the history of the past history of India, and where he's very active, and he has given several talks on that. With that, and without further much ado, I will welcome Jijit Nadamuri ji, and to start his talk with the introduction to the subject. Thank you.
Namaste, Kaurji. As you rightly said, we have been interacting quite a long, almost more than 2 years. It's nice to have meeting you in this medium. And many thanks for the organizers. So without spending any more time, let me introduce the subject that today we are talking. So I assume that this talk will be also recorded and be used as some sort of a study material in school, colleges. So that is what I would like to say, that our schools and colleges, as you know, they are not doing great in terms of educating our students or the new generation about many aspects of the Bharatiya civilization. They are doing something, but a lot of things are missed, and we wish that the school curriculum, etc., is changing with some more being grateful to the what our ancient texts can tell us about our prehistory, about the geography of Bharatavarsha, and all such aspects. So the most important thing I have noticed is that when the school or college textbooks talk about the ancient prehistory of Bharatavarsha, that is before the Guptas and Mauryas, mostly they will just touch upon the 16 Janapadas, and they say that there are these 16 Janapadas from Sindhu in the west to almost all the Gangetic plain. So they start with Gandhara, then say Kambhoja, and then Kuru Panchala, and then Kashi Kosala, Magadha. Then they will just pick one kingdom in the south, that is Ashmaka, and then there are some other Janapadas in the middle, in the Madhya, what is now currently in Madhya Pradesh, that is Avanti, and some similar like Chedi and such Janapadas, which is in the middle between Ganga plain and the Vindhya in the south, Vindhya mountains in the south. So pretty much this is how they sum up the geopolitical layout of Bharatavarsha. They say that there are some 16 Janapadas, and of course these phrases are they get these phrases from some of the earlier works, which is present in the history, which is like they start from the Mauryas and the Guptas, but they don't really acknowledge that this entire Janapada list, or even the list of kings, all of these are a continuum. So sometimes they acknowledge Chandragupta Maurya or some of his predecessors like the Nandas. But when it comes to some kings who are earlier to them, which is beyond the whatever the prehistoric horizon, this left historian academicians will agree, they will just convert that kind of kings as some mythology, and there is no rational, there is no law in just dismissing a part of the genealogy as mythology and the other part as history. Same thing they are doing with the list of Janapadas. So in my studies, when I looked at Mahabharata and Ramayana, and primarily into the Mahabharata, I see a very different picture.
Are you going to share your?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I think it's the right time to share the slides. Just a minute, I will just get permission for share. Yes, I think I can share. So that is what this talk is about. We will be just exploring and looking at what Mahabharata says about the Janapadas, or the total number of Janapadas that Mahabharata is reckoning in as existing in the Bharatavarsha. So the talk is titled "The Geography of the Mahabharata Aitihasic Janapadas." So we will just dwell into it. So before going into the Janapadas, I have to run some couple of slides to know to what extent our ancient civilization, and especially as represented in the Mahabharata, to what extent they know about the known world. So because I put this because some part of it is a lot of exaggerations are going on in WhatsApp and Facebook about it, and there is a lot of downplaying is going on in the leftist circle. So straight away, if you go into some of the verses that is mentioning about the globe, and it is basically uttered by Sanjaya, who is the minister of Dhritarashtra. And being the minister of Dhritarashtra, Sanjaya is something like a head of the spies or some kind of a collector of all the information about the world. So that much we can deduce from the Mahabharata. And he is having some information, very rudimentary information about the world. And he says that the world, entire world, there are continents in the shape of a rabbit and in the shape of a peepal tree. And you will be surprised how this is that kind of information you can have in Mahabharata. So I'm not getting into details. It can be as big as another talk. So this much is very clear. They have a very good rudimentary understanding about the globe, the planet Earth, and the shape of the continents. Even if they have not explored them, that is not to them. So they call this Eurasia and the North America as rabbit shaped, and Africa and South America as a kind of peepal tree kind of shape, and they can easily make it out. And they call a circling continent around all these four continents, that they call it Sudarshana. And we know that it is Antarctica when it is in polar azimuthal projection. So this much we are very clear. And then the Sanjaya also talks about Bharatavarsha, which is a bow-shaped sub-region of the Eurasia, that is a rabbit-shaped continent. So you can see that Bharatavarsha indeed is a bow-shaped, and it talks about another Airavata Varsha, which is again similar to Bharatavarsha because it is again bow-shaped. So these two things, two Varshas match up, and definitely the other, like the other five, all falls in between. So the 7 Varshas or the 7 sub-regions of the Eurasia, they know it very well. And they know that Bharatavarsha is the southernmost, and another Airavata Varsha, that is the terminology they given to the northern side of Eurasia, that is Siberia and such region, they call it. So they have full understanding about that as well. So again, they give some names of the mountains and as the boundaries of this Varsha, and the names of the Varshas also mentioned. So that is means they know a little bit of the entire globe, all the 4 main continents, and they know a little more detail about what is to the north of Bharatavarsha and all the way up to the Northern Ocean. And they have elaborated the Meru region, etc., and also mentioned about the four boundaries of the Meru region. So Bhadrashva they mentioned it is the Tarim Basin, and the Ketumala to the west of the Meru region they mentioned it's the Amodarya, that kind of Central Asian regions, and Uttarakuru and Jambu Dvipa. So all these things they are mentioning in very detail. And finally, the focus of Sanjaya is towards the Bharatavarsha that we call India, and he is very clearly enumerating the mountains that is there in Bharatavarsha, and some of them retain the same name, like Sakhya, which is the mountain in the Maharashtra, Karnataka region. And there is a break in Palghat, and the part that is south of that break is called Malaya Mountain. But the current terminology is that both Sakhya and Malaya together called the Western Ghats. But that was the ancient terminology. They are two different mountains. And you have in the east the Mahendra mountain, which is prominently in the Odisha. Pariyatra, that is to the west of Ujjain, and the Vindhya mountain again to the south of Ujjain, and the Shuktimat, that is the mountain to the northeast, basically in the Chedi kingdom, or the mountain to the south of Ganga river basin. So everything they very clearly mentions. And then Sanjaya also mentioned to Dhritarashtra about more than 150 rivers mentioned in the listed actually, where the including the prominent rivers like Ganga, Sindhu, Saraswati, Godavari, Narmada, Mahanadi, Shatadru, Chandrabhaga, Yamuna, Drashadwadi. It goes in very small rivers, like tributaries, everything is mentioned. And that is the kind of information that you get from Mahabharata. And then comes Janapadas. So the list of Janapadas that is enumerated in the Sanjaya's narrative to Bhishma, to Dhritarashtra. Basically, it is in the Bhishma Parva. There is some Upaparva called Jambukanda Nirmana Parva, like that. It is also in the 100 Parva classification as a standalone Parva. You can note it down. So this particular Parva list around 250 kingdoms. So if you want to compare with the today modern state of India, we have around 28 states, and of course it keeps changing, and around 739 districts. So if you look at it on an average, one kingdom or one Janapada is around you can say some 3 districts, that kind of a size. It varies, like it can be like 1 district to 3 districts kind of a size. You have a Janapada actually in Bharatavarsha. So today's our task is explore like a little more detail into the Janapada configuration. And obviously, like when I say 250, it's way beyond the 16th Janapada kind of a concept that we are being taught in the schools and college textbooks. So the prominent Janapadas, it is very familiar because of the main narrative of Mahabharata. The most important Janapada is the Kuru Janapada. In your enumeration of the Janapadas, it is mentioned as Kuru Panchala. So there is definitely a reason to that, because the Kuru and Panchala Janapadas, it is like a single. It was earlier a single Janapada that is ruled by the Bharatas, that is mentioned in the Rigveda. And if you are familiar with Rigveda or having some idea about it, so the most of the focus of Rigveda is on the Bharatas, so much that Srikant Talagiri, one of the famous researcher on Rigveda, says that the entire Rigveda is basically a book of Bharatas, or maybe in general the book of the Purus. So that was the situation in Rigveda. And subsequently Mahabharata is focusing on a period of time in which it's somewhat later, immediately later to the Rigvedic period, because you have the kings like Shantanu mentioned in Rigveda in the 10th mandala, which is the last or youngest mandala, the last developed mandala. And then immediately after that, his descendants, Dhritarashtra is mentioned in Yajurved, and then finally the Dhritarashtra's children, the Kauravas, they are the subject of the Mahabharata. So they are all connected and related and chronologically in sequence. And then in that, you will see a situation which you don't see in Rigveda, that the Bharata group has split into two parts, and they becomes the Panchalas and the Kurus. So that is the kind of situation that we are seeing in the Mahabharata. And that is why the kingdom layout, you see these two kingdoms, the Kuru and Panchala, split. And there was also some rivalry going on between these two kingdoms. But in your kingdom enumeration, people practically combine the Kuru Panchala actually. So anyway, the Mahabharata story is very famous. I need not to elaborate because this rivalry was going on, and then Bhishma was one of the person who is protecting the Kuru kingdom, and then the Drona, the preceptor also joined the Kuru forces, and they become very strong. And then the Kuru Panchala fight, and Drupada wanted to have defeat the Drona, and then like that. Finally, there occurred a political alliance because Pandus and Pandavas married Panchali, and then Drupada got re-established some kind of a hold on the Kuru family, and using with the help of the Pandavas, they overthrow the Kauravas, Dhritarashtra, everybody, and then finally, of course, it turned out all the princes died in the battle. So everything is known. So I don't know how to say much more about it. And then, so this is the central piece of the Bharatavarsha, or center of power during Bharatavarsha at the time of Mahabharata. And that is the reason why you see the Gandharas and the Dwaraka, they have presence in the Hastinapura or Indraprastha. The Gandhara was ruled by Shakuni, but if you look at the Mahabharata, he is always in the Hastinapur interacting with the Kauravas. That is because the center of power is in Kuru. And one more thing, like this, there is a kind of a road going on like this, and this is very famous. It is called Uttarapatha. Uttarapatha kind of route. So it is going through this Ganga river basin through Kuru, Panchala, and then this Bhaktika, Trikarta, Madrakekaya, Gandhara, like that. And there is a like a pass here, mountain pass, through which it was going and connecting with all the other kingdoms beyond Bharatavarsha. And as you see, the Gandhara is considered as a gateway. And this gateway is definitely mentioned in the Mahabharata as Purva Jyotisha and Dwarapala, like that. So it is this gate through which the wealth is going. So Shakuni is that way powerful because he is controlling all this land trade going on through the Uttarapatha. And that is why the Shakuni is a very powerful person, but the center of power is in Kuru. So he is living in here like a kind of an ambassador or a kind of representative of this land trade. Similarly, Dwaraka is the center of the sea trade. All the goods along sea goes through this the Dwaraka. That is why it is called Dwaraka, similar to the Dwarapala here. So all the sea trade, they are getting through Krishna, and that is why Krishna's presence is you can see in Indraprastha. Like he is aligned with the Pandavas, while the land trade or Shakuni is aligned with the Kauravas in Hastinapur. So this is how the political and economical and layout that was existed during the Mahabharata period. And you have something like the neighborhood of the Kuru, the Matsyas. This is the place the Pandavas selected for doing the Ajnatavas. There is a reason. There's a reason to it, because the Virata city is actually surrounded by the mountains, so it's like inaccessible it's not easily to attack that capital, etc. So there is it allows a lot of secrecy, and that is why the Matsya is there that they selected. And if you have gone through Mahabharata very closely, the the Drupada, the Panjala king, has got one son. In fact, the son was somewhat like gender neutral, or he was born as a woman and then changed his gender into male. So this is Shikhandi. So Shikhandi exhibited both the characteristics of male and female, but Drupada concealed the female aspect of the Shikhandi, and he married Shikhandi to the Dasharna princess. So that is where the Dasharna comes into place, and Dasharna is again southern neighborhood of the Panchala. So it's how it adds up. And you have nearby the Dasharna Chedi is there. So Chedi is the king, the kingdom of Shishupala, and Shishupala is connected to the Krishna through like a family relationship, just like Krishna's. How is Krishna related to Pandavas? Same way Krishna is related to Shishupala, but he started getting into an alliance with the Jarasandha of Magadha. And so they are all these kingdoms like Magadha, Chedi, Dasharna, Karusha, all these things got aligned with this Jarasandha. And as a result, he was like an undeclared emperor, kind of, or just to become the emperor of the entire Bharatavarsha. That was the kind of situation, which was like averted by the political action of Krishna, because he aligned with the Pandavas and decided to make as the king or the emperor of Bharatavarsha, because he has got the qualities, because he is not into like abusing the power. So that is some primary reason, and he has the right understanding of dharma as it has to be. So they have the Pandavas like Krishna, and then Bhima and Arjuna. They went in a secret mission, like the whatever, like in modern India we do the spies. They send the spies. So there is a secret mission, goes to Magadha and then kills Jarasandha. And then he conducts a Rajasuya, and in that Rajasuya, again these kingdoms are enumerated, like bringing tribute to Yudhishthira. So actually, so that is the right point where we will try to get some more clarity about the other kingdoms. So of course, in that kind of political situation, the four brothers of Yudhishthira goes in the four direction, and that is where you get to know this entire layout of Bharatavarsha more closely. So Arjuna goes to the north side, and he's meeting these other kingdoms like Bahlika, Trikarta, Madra, Kekeya, all these places, and Kashmira, Cambodia, Derada, Rishika. The surprise fact is that there is a mention of China somewhere in the northern side. So they are always mentioned along with the Derata, Cambojas, etc. And then sometimes with Loha, that is Leh. Leh is the like Ladakh capital city. So Leh. So Loha is mentioned. So and in that neighborhood, China is mentioned. So definitely this is one of the oldest reference to the name China, which subsequently got associated with the entire big country that is now we call China. But definitely anybody knows history knows that the entire that entire big country that is currently called China, which is bigger than India, was not completely named as China. So this in Mahabharata they appear as a small Janapada somewhere in the Himalayas, and somehow this particular name got attached to the big country. The main center of power of China was again to the Eastern Ocean. So it's not the same as what is mentioned in Mahabharata as a small Janapada. But of course, there is a mention of Paramachina. So that means they have the authors of Mahabharata had some kind of information that there is Janapadas, more Janapadas with the name China. So that's about it. And of course, the Madra Desha is very familiar because the two Pandavas, the twins, Nakula and Sahadeva, their uncle is the Madra king Shalya. The Shalya's sister Madri is their mother. All these things are known actually. And another kind of doubt I need to clear is about Bahlikas, because a lot of researchers associate Bahlikas with Balk. But if you look at all the cross references in Mahabharata, they very clearly some kingdom which is very close to Kurukshetra. The reason being that in the Arjuna's travels they are there very close in the, and again in various other travels like in Ramayana there is a mention about the Bahlikas which occurs before the Bharata, the traveler from Ayodhya to Kekaya. He has encountered a Bahlika city before even meeting the reaching the Bipash, that is the Bias river. So all these both the cross referencing in Mahabharata and Ramayana indicates the Bahlika is just the branch that branch of the Kurus branched off and moving westward, similar to all the westward migrations of royal dynasties from Sindhu Saraswati region towards the west. And that kind of westward migrations, different waves of westward migration of the various royal dynasties like the Anus and Rukyus. This is discussed by Srikant Talgeri in Rigved. But this kind of westward migration continued during the period of Mahabharata. So Bahlika is just one of that last or the wave that is captured in the Mahabharata, where a small part of the Kuru branch, to be precise, the elder brother of Shantanu, they were just separated and migrating to the west. So the Bahlika is somewhere in the Punjab, in the neighborhood of Haryana. So that is the kind of Bahlika we get to know in the Mahabharata. And in subsequent phases, since I'm saying they have migrated in historical period, they have reached as far as the city, which is the one of the major when after the Uttara Pradesh crosses the mountain passes. So that explains it very well. That is a migration. Similar to the Gandhara, because in currently all the history books they say Gandhara is a Kandahar. But the Mahabharata Gandhara, it is very clearly in Charasada region of Pakistan where I have located. The Charasada is a valley similar to the Kashmir Valley surrounded by mountains. And that very clearly is similar to the description in Mahabharata. And of course, even if you don't agree with that, the cities that of Gandhara, they mentioned Takshashila and Pushkalavati, which is currently what is the Takshashila, and this Peshawar, Purushapura is Peshawar, and there is a Pushkalavati near Charasada. Its name is not changed. Even now in the modern Pakistan, the name is Pushkalavati. So they all adds up. So again, that if you the Kandahar, what we now know in the Afghanistan, that somewhere here, it's not there in the map, but if you plot it, it will be coming somewhere here in the Afghanistan. That is that's a result of a later migration actually. And so this is another part I want to say that all this situation, that the locations of the kingdoms, they are not like a photograph. They are more like a dynamic situation where you can only take snapshots. So that is why the Salva here, I have put it Salva here, but actually the Salvas and Madras were together at some point of time because they had a common ancestor. So the Salva and Madra, their common ancestor is mentioned as CB. And I have located CB here. That is currently the city of CB is indicative of that CB. But if you look at it in some other point of time, they were somewhere here to the north of Charasada, with cities like Arishtapura mentioned. And there is a indirect vague reference of the Shivis in Rigveda also, where they are located into the north of Gandhara. And again, there is an indirect reference to Gandhara in Rigveda, but at that time they were known as the Gandharvas, because again, this the most ancient name of the Gandhara is Gandharva, and that is how Rigveda knows these people. They were all called the Gandharvas. But somehow the Swara, the Va has gone, just like some evolution of the word, it became Gandhara. So technically, Shaguni or Gandhari, all these people are Gandharvas. And in Ramayana, they call very clearly that this is a Gandharva kingdom. And this Kekaya, that is the Bharata's maternal uncle, asked Bharata to defeat the Gandharva kingdom. So it's very much adds up in the Ramayana. The Gandharva terminology is there in Rigveda and in Ramayana, but when it comes to Mahabharata, the name is clearly mentioned as Gandhara. So that transformation happened somewhere after the Rigvedic and the core Ramayana period. During the lifetime of the Pandavas, they were known as the Gandharas. Similarly, the Kausalas is again, there is a terminology, the Kashi Kausala, that is a word typically we use. That is because of the same reason, they have a common ancestry, and it is what is the ancestry. Second is the conquest as well. So during the Ramayana period, it is mentioned the Kashi king was a friend of Rama, and technically for all reasons, the kings of Ayodhya treated Kashi as a part of the or a vassal state of Kausala. So that is how these people, this Kashi Kausala kind of a terminology comes in. And Vatsa is again a branch of the Kurus who was migrated further eastward and then somewhere got into the place where Ganga and Yamuna joins. So of course, this is also very much interesting when the Hastinapur city got flooded in later after Janamajaya's rule. There is a king called Nichakshu. He has moved the capital to Kaushambi, the capital of Vatsa kingdom. And of course, Magadha I mentioned, then Anga is there. Anga is basically, you know very well, very famous as a country that Duryodhana gave to Karna. But that is one way of interpreting it. But other way of interpreting is that the Magadhas or Anga, these are mixed varnas because they are mentioned as varnas also. Like when there is a intermixture of Brahmana, Kshatriya varnas, it will result into many other varnas, and Suta, Magadhas, all these are different the mixed varnas, and they started their rule in the regions like Anga. So Anga is definitely a Suta kingdom. So somehow when Karna is called as a Suta, then automatically Duryodhana chose to make him the king of all the Sutas. That is how the Anga kingdom came about, and in relation with Karna. Magadha is again a mixture varna, and then they are there somewhere here. That is the kind of history of this region. And again, just like the Salvas and the Madras have a common ancestry, the Anga, Vanga, Pundra, Sukma, and Kalinga, these many kingdoms have a common ancestry. They mentioned they were all the children of Bali. Bali is again, there is no reason to think that it is different from the Mahabali, which is mentioned in Bhagavata Purana, because if you look at the narrative in Ramayana and even in Mahabharata, the entire incident of Vamana interacting with Bali happened in this region. And Gaya, which is a very famous Buddhist pilgrimage site, is also the place where the Vamana interacted with Bali, and he was giving land. Bali was giving land to this Vamana, all these things. Siddhasrama of Vamana is again very close to this region. So there is definitely a kind of a very close connection of the narrative of Vamana and Bali in this region. And all these 5 kingdoms were considered as of the Bali's kingdom. And of course, somehow, maybe because of the sea trade, because if you look at through the land, it is a very big distance between these areas. That doesn't seem to be any current connection, but there is a land related interaction, because the sea related interaction, because I mentioned Dwaraka is a seaport and the center of sea trade. So Vangadesha and Kalinga, and then the southern regions, Dravida, and then Pandya, the Chola, Pandya, Kerala, and then this Narmada river basin. All these things were actually synchronized because of the sea trade. So definitely, because the Mahabali's narrative is somehow linked with Kerala, for example, because Onam is celebrated with Mahabali as one of the figure. And then Bali Rashtra, that is Narmada region is also considered as Balirashtra because there is a Bhrigu Kacha there. Bhrigu, the Bhrigu is basically Mahabali's priest, that is Bhargava Shukra, is basically the priest of Mahabali, and he is a Bhargava, and this entire region is called Bhargava Kshetra. That is the region of Bhargavas, and this particular city is very much famous. It's a port city called Bhrigu Kacha, which is now known as Braj. It's again a seaport similar to Dwarka. So all these regions are again culturally synchronized. So that is the reason why we have a connection. So Mahabali is associated with this Vanga, Angavanga, Pundra, Sumha, and Kalinga, the 5 kingdoms. Again, here in Narmada as Balirashtra, and again Kerala as the king of ancient king of Kerala. So all these things add up because of that sea trade, and it is like that. So by this, I have introduced you about the southern kingdoms, Dravida, Chola, Pandya, and Kerala. And obviously, this is again, I want to stress out, the Mahabharata doesn't seem to know about Aryan invasion theory or agree with anything of it, because as per Mahabharata, Dravida is a somewhat independent, separate kingdom similar to Chola, Pandya, Kerala. So there goes the Aryan invasion theory into the Arabian Sea, because we have never used the term Dravida as something opposite to Arya or anything like that. These are all like imagination. If I tell that if there is anything called mythology that is associated with our history, then Aryan invasion theory fits the bill, because that is the biggest mythology that we have been listening to for almost 2 centuries. Whereas what we call Puranas or Itihasas, they are very close to historical account. If anything which is close to mythology is, then it is Aryan invasion theory. Because I don't know from where they got these 2 terminologies like Dravida and then Arya, and then try to make it like 2 opposite camps. It's never like that. None of our Mahabharata or Puranas or Vedas have again agreed to this kind of a terminology. So just get it out from your head. That is the only way you are going to understand the true history and geopolitics of the ancient Bharatavarsha. So that is it. And again, you will see some of the places which is familiar in Ramayana, like Kishkinda. So I have located it here, and the prominent location of Kishkinda, based on various narratives and based on the current a lot of atheisms, etc. That it is in the kind of north of Karnataka, the Hampi region, that is well known as Kishkinda. But I just made sure that these are all probabilities. The highest probability now again definitely it is Hampi, but if you read Ramayana, it can be associated with a larger region somewhere along the Krishna basin. So Krishna basin, Krishna and Pamba, the older name of Tungabhadra. So the Pamba and the Krishna, or Krishna and Tungabhadra currently. The Krishna Tungabhadra basin is anywhere the location Kishkinda can be located if you follow the proper narrative of Ramayana. But it makes sense in a way, and it is a highly maybe with a lot of parameters. If you add up, Hampi is a very close or high probable place where you can locate Kishkinda. And if I have left out anything, yeah, the Haihaya is there. That is the kingdom of Kartavirya, and you just get connected to Ramayana and Mahabharata. In Ramayana, it is connected because Ravana had an interaction with the Haihaya king Kartavirya, and again Parashurama and Kartavirya, there is a kind of narrative which is mentioned. And it's also present very actively in Mahabharata as again the kingdom of Kartavirya, Arjuna, with Mahishmati as the capital. And in Sahadeva's narrate the southern military campaign of Sahadeva, as I mentioned earlier, the four brothers of Yudhishthira moved and traveled in all the 4 directions. So Sahadeva come to the south. He has passed through the Avanti and Hayhaya, and then all the southern kingdoms, Pandya, Chola, Kerala, like that. So I'm stressing this point once again is because you see that if it is this Mahabharata or Ramayana or isolated stories, they will never add up. The reason why they are adding up, because the locations when it is mentioned in Mahabharata or in Ramayana, they almost always add up, and almost always the same. The kingdoms can be located based on Ramayana narrative and based on Mahabharata narrative. 80% of the cases they are properly located at the same place in the Bharatavarsha map. So all these things is another clarity for you if you have not having it already, that this is definitely a kind of a historical narrative, but this historical narrative is not told to us by a historian of the modern sense, but these narratives were brought into our notice in the form of kavyas or poetry. So itihasas, both Ramayana and Mahabharata, they are historical account, no doubt about it, but they are not narrated as like how a historian would narrate it. They are narrated as poetry. So these two aspects you should be very much clear about. Otherwise, you will go either this way or that way. Because if you believe everything in the poetry is true, then it will mislead you, and then you will go into the Arabian Sea. And if you think the other way, like that it is you get the impression that it has to be narrated like a history, again, then you will be failing, because that is not. So we have to be very true to the actual situation, that historical narratives or geographical narratives or technological narratives, that all narrated by poets. But poets means they are not just like the kind of modern day poets who have no knowledge about proper geography or proper technology or anything. They are more invested in the technology of that time. They are more invested in the geography of that time than what modern day poets would be having, because currently everything is compartmentalized. The people who are studying poetry will be somewhat taking the fourth group, and then they will be like getting into the literature domain, and they care nothing about the technology or anything about geography, etc. But it's not the case. Vyasa and Valmiki, all these people, these great scholars, they are poets, but they have very good understanding about what they are talking about in like geography or technology. The technology, what I am mentioning is that some things which is described like magically in Mahabharata, and there is a very high chance that there are some kind of technologies which are rendered in poetic manner. And the way you should approach this is like something like a cryptographer will approach to some messages which is cryptically handed over to them. You should not assume those things literally. Then you will be losing your track. You should understand, crack the code, and then you will be hitting some truth. Otherwise, if you are straightforward reading the Mahabharata Ramayana and then try to find out the reality, there is a very less chance that you will be getting anywhere close to the truth. So just a few words like that. So I think we have more or less familiar with this entire region, but maybe I need to explain the Lauhitya here. Some people may be expecting the Kamarupa, Pragjyotisha in this region. But see, there is a reason to that. Because, some of my older maps will be having Pragjyotisha mentioned here. But the Mahabharata Pragjyotisha, very clearly based on the narrative, I have to locate it somewhere in the Himachal Punjab boundary. And there is a reason why it is later been seen in the later historical period in the Assam region, because there is a huge migration starting from Kashmir and the Ladakh area. The entire people, they were called Parvatas, like Dravida is a common name for many of the southern kingdoms. The Parvata is the common name for many kingdoms on the Himalayas. So these people on the Himalaya, they were actually in synchrony of the entire region from up to the Arunachal Pradesh. So there are migrations happened. So the Pragjyotisha, which is somewhat a Himalayan kingdom in the Himachal Pradesh, somehow they got migrated into the Assam region. That is why you are seeing the descendants, all these people in the Assam region. So Pragjyotisha is there in the Assam, etc. The Bhauma dynasty, everything is there in this region. So I think that is one. And then is the Sauvira and Sindhu. So Sindhu is the kingdom of Jayadratha. If you follow the Mahabharata correctly, this is not exactly Sindh. I was also confused because in earlier maps I identified with Sindh, but it is not a Sindh, the province of Pakistan, but somewhere to the north of it. So the Sindhu Desha of Jayadrathas, we have to identify it somewhere to the southern Punjab. It is just the river Sindhu after the 5 rivers have joined. So to the north of Sindhu, there is a kingdom called Panchanada, where the 5 rivers are joining, ready to be, are combining and joining, ready to join with the Sindhu. But so once they all join together and it is flowing as a single river, that is the place Jayadratha has ruled. To the north of it is Panchanada, and to the south of it is Sauvira. So the northern part of the Sindh province, you can say that is Sauvira kingdom. And this Sindhu, Sivi, Sauvira, these 3 kingdoms were jointly ruled by Jayadratha. Like he was like a mini emperor in the western region. So that is how that explains. I think that explains everything. Like Trigarta is there because of a minor kingdom. Their only fame is that they were the biggest enemy of Arjuna during Mahabharata war. They promised the pledge to kill Arjuna, but finally Arjuna managed to kill all of them. Entire race got exterminated. So this I'm just giving us because it will be a limited talk. Maybe if it continues in a series, then I can explain in detail. And of course, you see, it's we have touched all the major part of the 250 kingdoms. Again, this 250 is not exhaustive. If I say exhaustive number, there are kingdoms which are not listed in the Sanjaya's list of kingdoms in the Bhuvanakosha. So if you add up all of them, it will be around 300 plus kingdoms in reality. But 250 is enough to tell you that 16 Janapadas is just a very small subset of what was there in the ancient period. It was definitely much more than that. So 250 is enough to break that spell about the 16 Janapadas. So here actually, it's the same map, but we have to make it large, a little more larger. I have even more larger maps, but it's very difficult to present. So you can, this is like a map where you can see the all the capitals of each kingdom. So like for example, Matsya, the Virat Nagari, it is on a mountain. That is why the Pandavas were there. So you can see the Sindhu, the capital, Rishabhadarbapura, and Sauvira, capital, Roruka, the Sivi, there is a Sivi, and then the Gandhara, the Pushkalavadi, and Takshashila capitals, and Kamboja, the Rajapura capital, and Kashmir. The Srinagara is not mentioned in Mahabharata, that's why I have not put it here. Maybe it is a little more later to the Mahabharata time period. That city is not mentioned. Then the Kekeya Girivaraja is there. Again, it is a capital surrounded by mountains, just like the Girivaraja capital of Magadha. Then the Madra is there, then the southern kingdoms. And you can also see the Saraswati river. This is the best plot of Saraswati after I analyzed around 100 drainage maps of Saraswati and we saw satellite imagery, everything. So Saraswati river, then Shatadru, Vipasha. Vipasha is BS, Shatadru is Satluj, Iravati is Ravi river, Chandrabhaga is Chenab, Vitasta. Vitasta is the Jalam river actually, and the Sindhu is there. The Jalam river of Kashmir is there. And then the Kurukshetra, Indraprastha, and then Hastinapur, Yamuna, Ganga, then Gomati, Sarayu, Gandaki, and then this particular region is called Laukitya because the river name Brahmaputra is not the name which is familiar to Mahabharata. The river is called Laukiti, the red color river. That is why this entire region is called Laukitya. And then Kaushiki, then Karatoya, all these rivers are there. You have this Avanti, Haya, Dwarka, Brahmavaksha is there. Then Vidarbha, again, the central kingdom from where Krishna is married. And the Dakshina Bharata, you can again continuation of that, the Pandya, Kerala, Chola, Dravida, and then Karnataka is again a name. You may be surprised it is there in Mahabharata, so it's very old. Kerala is very old name. Gomanta, that is Goa. Konkana, that is Konkan. All these places is there. Then Dantakaranya, which is a place where there are no kingdoms, and that was a big forest. And Dantavada, that is currently the small remnant of Dantakaranya. And I have mentioned Lanka here, and many of my friends have a lot of disputes about the location of Ganga, means Lanka, that it is because Hanuman traveled in southern direction. So this I have, because I know the reason for why it is, but I will explain it in one of my upcoming books because it requires a little more elaboration. But I have considered many locations for Lanka based on the narrative of Ramayana. But the location which fits to the entire big, that is the Sundarakanda, and that is a big kanda in Ramayana. That big narrative, if you want to match anywhere in any place in the world, there is only one place, that is the Sri Lanka. The three Trikuta mountains, and then that is there in Sri Lanka, and then there is a Suvelagiri, which is to the north of Trikuta. There is a Lambagiri, that is a mountain which is in the north-south direction, pointing towards the Trikuta mountains. All these things are found only in Lanka, that is Sri Lanka. But if you try to see, there are people who are locating that based on the Yojana duration, Yojana length, people try to locate the Lanka in Antarctica and Australia, etc. But it is absolutely nonsense, because the length of the Yojana is not a constant. In Ramayana itself, in different narratives of Ramayana itself, the Yojana length changes from as small as 150 meters to as big as 13 kilometers. So which Yojana will you take? In Ramayana's text itself, it is changing. In Mahabharata also, there is a lot of variability in the length of Yojana. So you don't just go with some British India definition of Yojana and then locate Lanka in Antarctica, etc. It's completely nonsense. It completely defeats the scientific temper and simple kindergarten logic that we have been built into our scholarship, Bharatiya scholarship for such a long time. So this is some of the things, and again, I think this is the part I wanted to discuss and present into this particular talk. Definitely, there is higher resolution of these maps, in much more higher. Like for example, this one is the Kuru region, where all the smaller towns and cities in the Kuru region is mentioned, etc. But definitely, the primary part of the talk is to get introduced to the Bharatavarsha with all its Janapadas, and to bring into the point that there are more than these 16 Janapadas, and it is a pity that as a student or of a college or school, you just only learn about only this 15, and then 16 think that everything else is a forest. No, it's not like that. So there are a lot of other interesting topics related to this, but definitely we will bring it in some other talks, definitely. And I'm not sure like if anybody keeping track of time.
There are 4 more minutes, but we also need to take the questions.
Oh, okay. So I think I will stop here. If there is any kind of questions, we can discuss that and then take it away.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jijitji. Very instructive, and actually for me at least, I learned quite a few things in the process, and I'm sure a lot of people will have questions over here. I will take the opportunity of asking the first question, taking advantage of being a moderator. On your map, you showed Harivarsha. Most of the names which I saw were the names which are connected to the people, etc., etc. And but why Harivarsha? That region is called Harivarsha.
Yes, yes. Actually, it's a part of some other talk where I mentioned about the Eurasia, that is especially the northern side of Bharatavarsha up to the Siberia or the Northern Ocean. That was known to the ancient people, and they divided the entire region from Bharatavarsha to Siberia into 7 varshas or 7 sub-regions. After Bharatavarsha, the immediate next varsha is called Himavat Varsha, which is the Himalayan mountainous region. And if you correspond it to the modern map, that is like Uttarakhand, Kashmir, and Himachal Pradesh, Arunachal Pradesh, all the mountainous region that will fall into the Himavat Varsha, and equivalent amount of parts in the southern Tibet. After the Himavat Varsha, the next Varsha is called Harivarsha. The third Varsha, if you start from Bharatavarsha, the Bharatavarsha is the first, then to the north of it, Himavat Varsha, and the third one is the Harivarsha. And Harivarsha, it is called, it's a southern boundary is the this Himavat Varsha, and the northern one is the Nishadha mountains. And we have identified Nishadha as the Kunlun mountains. Kunlun is the boundary, the mountain that separate Tibet from Xinjiang. So the Tibetan region, at least 80% of the Tibetan region is what we can identify as Harivarsha. But if you are asking about the etymology, the word Hari is basically, it is given as the green color or brown color, light brown color, etc. So the Hari can indicate somebody with a tawny color, or again, it's a very importantly in Rigved, these horses are named as based on their color, and Hari colored horses, that is tawny colored horses, are considered as one of the very important, very good quality horses. Indra's chariot was driven by the Hari horses. If you know the Tibetan or the northern Himalayan region, including the Kashmir Valley, that was the place from where you get good quality horses. So that could be the reason why that particular name come to that region. So, for example, even in Arjuna's northern military campaign, he has reached this Tibetan region near Manasa Sarovar and Kailas, and what he got is good quality horses. Yes. So the horse color could be one reason. The place where you get good quality horses be the name of the Harivarsha. The Hari name could come from that, but it has nothing, as far as I see, nothing to do with Sri Hari Vishnu.
That's what actually I asked. Thank you very much. The Rajgopalacharya ji, can you please ask your question?
Namaste, sir. I am Parthasarathy from Chennai.
Yes.
In Guptaswamy Shastri Research Institute. I have got a few questions. One is where are the other dvipas? You have mentioned about, yes, Jambu Dvipa, you have it. Where are the other dvipas? One question. Second question, I will give the question. The Kamyamana and Daumyamana, these we have given near the Punjab region. Of course, scholars can vary, but Dr. Ali puts them in the region of the Kuru kingdom itself. And there is a logic about it, because in those days, you know, the Matsya was actually the Kichaka and other people. It is very difficult to cross other regions and have that as your a region to live for a number of years. Politically also, it is very difficult to go there. So this is one thing, that's a difference. And another question is, there have been Dr. Ali in his SM Ali in his Geography of Purana gives in page 174 the trade routes of India. He gives clearly the land routes existing connecting to through Avanti connecting to Bhrukukacha. In those days, Bhrukukacha was most important. Even during Greeks and Roman period and the Arab period, Bhrukukacha was very Bharuch is very important. Dwarka was not important. So it was connecting in the routes were there and he has given in that. Then along the sea route, along the land route, along the coastal by eastern side, from Bengal to Kanyakumari or Kerala, there were land routes existing. But I don't find any reference in many of these books, Greek, Roman, any book, about sea route connecting the Bengal region and the Dwarka region. I have not read about it. Can you throw some light on that, sir? Thank you very much. Your lecture was excellent.
Yeah, thank you. So if you forgot any of the questions, you please remind me. The first question is about Dvipa. So there are, if you look at the Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Puran, there will be a lot of different narratives about the Dvipas. Some of them may be conflicting also. I have followed because Mahabharata I considered within the high esteem because of the data integrity, etc. I have followed the narrative of Sanjaya. For the start of the Kurukshetra war, he is enumerating the entire world in a kind of fashion, like the largest region, that is the entire globe, in a few lines, and then the sub-regions in its more detail, and finally Bharatavarsha in a huge detail. So in that, he mentioned as Dvipas, only 4 Dvipas he mentioning, and they happen to be the 4 major continents of globe as we know it. So I've considered it in a very high esteem. So the 4 Dvipas the Sanjaya mentioned, that is using the terminology Dvipa, that is 2 in the shape of rabbit, and he didn't name any of these Dvipas, but we know from the globe the rabbit-shaped Dvipas are the Eurasia and North America. They look like rabbit. You can, especially in this polar azimuthal projection, they look like rabbits. And the 2 others he mentioned is in the shape of a banyan tree or peepal tree. Again, Africa and South America look like that. And the 3rd one he mentioned a circular Dvipa that becomes circular because of the projection. In the projection, these Dvipas, let me try to share it once again. Yeah. So this in the projection, yeah.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. MC.
So in the projection, you don't have to guess anything, that they looks like rabbits. These two continents look like rabbits. The other 2 continents look like and this Antarctica, it's actually in the polar azimuthal projection, it becomes a circle surrounding the other islands. And he doesn't mention about this at all. So this is maybe a kind of blind spot that Sanjaya doesn't know about. So
which Dvipa is named? The people in South America. What is the name? Which you
name is not given. He's just, this is the exact word actually. The Sudarshanam Pravakshami Deepam Te Kunandana Parimandalo Maharajo Deeposul Sau Chakra Samstita Levanena Samudrana Samadada Parivarte Sudarshana Deepo Drishyate Chandramandale Dvirashmi Pipalas Tatra Dvirashme Shasho Maha. So this last line is what I'm talking about. 2 continents are in the shape of tree, and 2 others are in the shape of a rabbit. So this is a remarkable discovery, even though you feel like it's just a single line and it just breaks your head that Sanjaya knows about it, and such an ancient period of So these are the very realistic Dvipas or continents that Sanjaya mentioned. And the 7, again, these in Puranas they call Sapta Dvipas, but in Sanjaya's words they are not Dvipas, they are Varshas, that is sub-regions. So he is elaborating the Eurasian region. Definitely this is the Eurasian, right? In Europe and Asia and then India. So in this region, he is dividing it into 7 parts. They are called Sapta Varshas, 7 sub-regions. So maybe there is a mix-up happened in Puranas because they just maybe change the word Varsha into Dvipa, then it finally resulted into Sapta Dvipa. And again, during the Gupta or Maurya Gupta period, they were traveling a lot along the oceans. They may be discovering the 7 continents. That's at that time, but it is a later time. Mahabharata happened before that. So there may have mixing up the terminologies a little bit here and there. And then the Saptadvipa concept has come out from that. But much more earlier, Sanjay, I consider much more earlier to that Puranic narrative, very much ancient to the core of Mahabharata. So he is definitely earlier. This kind of an understanding about, that's why the names are so, maybe the names are just emerging. The names are not mentioned, only the shape is mentioned about this. So I think that is, I answered the first part.
Thank you.
And whatever you mentioned about is correct about the other parts. I have mentioned only about the Uttarapatha. If you look at Nalopakhana, in the Nala Damayanti dialogue, he mentioned about Dakshinapatha. He mentioned that there is a road, because Damayanti and Nala, they both lost the dice game, and then finally they were in the forest, and Nala lost all the dress and he is naked, and he wanted to save his wife. So he asked Damayanti to follow the Dakshinapatha route, and he says from Ayodhya to Ujjaini, Ayodhya to this, Ujjaini, this is Ujjaini, and then it goes to Vidarbha.
Avanti, it goes.
Yeah. So Avanti
region is that well connected.
Yeah, it goes to Vidarbha, and then
yes.
In Sahadeva's narrative, they mentioned that this Dakshinapatha goes from Vidarbha further south to Ashmaka. And in the narrative of Sahadeva, that is a southern military campaign of Sahadeva, the Bhrugacha is mentioned. So definitely there are branching roads connecting to Bhrugacha. So you are absolutely right about that. And I missed the other question. If you can just remind me, I can tell you.
That is whether the reference to sea route connecting east and west.
Pardon?
Reference to, you have made a reference to those days, because there was a land route, there was no land route, they were going along the sea. But even Greek and Rome, they never came. They have to go around Sri Lanka.
Yeah, I would request to please keep the question short, because there are other people who are going to.
I have finished.
Yeah, I will just in single word, I will answer. The Greek have no knowledge of the local travel of happened in our within the India, how the people move, they have no clue about it. So the Greeks primarily knows only about the western side, because they are coming from the west. But talking about the sea movement, because of all the synchronization happened, because of the link up between Lanka and Vangadesha, I have noted down. And there is like, of course, even in current archaeology, you get materials. Like for example, in Kerala, you get materials from Dwaraka, Bhubacha region, Vanga region, even China region, etc. So they are all even based, even if you don't look at any of the verses in Mahabharata, current archaeology support the view that they were all connected.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Sanjay ji, can you please ask your question? Please keep the questions a little short. You are on mute, Sanjay ji.
This is Krishna Susarla. I'm not sure if you were.
I will unmute. Okay.
Yes.
Yes, sir. Yeah. First off, thank you so much, sir, for doing all this good work. This is very necessary to instill some sort of, pride as a Hindu, and, to understand our religion, our culture, the accuracy of our Shastras and our, stories and mythology, which had been wiped out in the modern world. So my question was, are you able to, connect to the current government, or, to change the education system in India? Because it's really bad news. I mean, the education in India is so anti-Hindu that right from a young age, we don't learn anything. And therefore, we have no pride and no understanding. And it's getting worse because I'm an NRI. I live in the US.
Can you keep the question short, please?
Yeah.
And we'll move
so can you tell me how you are connected? And secondly, is there any books I can read from you or from others which will give me a better understanding?
Yeah, for the related to the government, there is a recent mail circulated where it's asking for the feedback of scholars and for changing the textbook. So I'm actively participating in that. I'm putting my research papers, around 6 research papers I have published. I can share it. You also maybe Paul G will be able to share it to you as well. So this information, Of course, I mean, after this 7 years, they are only talking now, but better than late, it's happening. That's what I would say.
Okay.
That there is some feedback they are asking. Where we are
Okay. And any books that you can recommend for us to read? Your books or anybody else's books?
Yeah. Currently, my research papers are available, but I'm trying to make a formal book on this particular topic, because there is so many number of maps, etc. That is why it is taking a lot of time, but it will be coming out by end of this year or early next year, like that. So
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I have given my phone number here. So if any further questions or any information from Digit is needed, please contact me and I will try to get it for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Krishna Susralaji, please ask your question.
Namaskaram. Thank you for the talk. I just wanted to know regarding that verse you mentioned describing the geography of the world. I assume that's from Mahabharata, Sudarshanam, that verse.
Yeah.
Do you have the verse numbers of that verse? And also, what edition of the Mahabharata are you using? Is it the critical edition? If not, which edition are you using?
I am using the critical edition of Mahabharata. So anything which is later, it is not part of my this one. I can give you, like, maybe I can give you the verse number through Callji. It is there in my research paper. Definitely all the verse numbers are quoted. I can give that link to you. But if you are actually familiar with the text, I can say it is in Bhishma Parva Bhuvana Kosha. Adhyaya 6, in the Bhishma Parva Adhyaya 6 or to 9, 9th Adhyaya or 6th Adhyaya, if I'm remembering correct. But I have quoted the entire exact verse number in my research papers.
Okay, yeah, I have the critical edition in translation, but I have a different edition that I'm currently reading. Yeah, if I could get that verse number from you, I'd really appreciate it. I definitely like to keep these kinds of verses, in my notes so that I can refer to them again. I don't know if there's someone can email it to me. I would really appreciate.
Okay, so you can search up the Digit Nandamuri Ravi India facts, and you will land up into my research paper.
Okay, so thank you for this. And now we will move to Bandana Malhotra ji. Please ask your question.
Yeah, I just had a very small question, and that is, what is the meaning of Mlecha? You described everything, but you didn't mention about what Mlecha is.
Yeah, actually, that is the name. For example, I'm only looking at the name of the kingdom. So both when Nagula goes to the western side for the military campaign, he encounters the Mlechas to the Western Ocean, that is currently in Karachi, like that. And Bhima is going to the east, and somewhere in the Bangladesh seashore region, he encounters the Mlechas. So based on all these things and various other narratives in the Mahabharata and Puranas, what I understand that anybody who is not properly following the Vedic rites, that is the Vedic rites as in the birth, marriage, and death ceremonies, they are termed as the Mlechas. The name Mlecha is good. So they are out of they have a different culture, which is not exactly following the Vedic civilizational culture, but this is because the Western historians or leftists try to play it out, but because that is not correct, because there is a very kind of warm, happy interaction between the Mlecha kind of kings and merchants with the Kurus and the Pandavas. And just one example I'll give, that Vidura is communicating with Yudhishthira during that House of Lac incident. So that he is communicating in the Mlecha language. So it is like a multilingual or one of the language that is known to all the kings. They sometimes some secret communication can happen in the Mlecha language. So that is kind of like an equation between the Mlechas and the Kuru Panchalas.
So basically they were at the seaports? They were at the corner?
They were primarily they were living at the seaports, and maybe we can assume that they have an intermixture culture with all the other cultures that is in sea trade with them. So that's a mixed culture.
Thank you very much. Very good lecture.
There is a one question which I see on the chat part. It says, how is China described in Mahabharata?
Yes. So this every talk people ask about the China because it's very surprising. I will say that the word China, exactly the pronoun says China. The word China is used in Mahabharata as a small Janapata, and its location is identified based on the clustering of the words. So, for example, they will always be clubbed together with the Cambodia, then Shakas, like that, and Daradas. So somewhere close to the Kashmir, not exactly Kashmir Valley, but the neighborhood of Kashmir Valley, the Kambojas, Daradas, all the Loha, all these tribes are there in the neighborhood of Kashmira. And in that, along with these neighbors, China word is mentioned. So definitely that small Janapata which was interacting with Yudhishthira and the Kurus, they were somewhere close to the Kashmir, at least the Jammu Kashmir, a larger area, neighborhood of that region, the Chinas were there. And this is actually because I have not got to converse with any Chinese historian yet, but I'm always putting my word, but I'm claiming that this is maybe one of the oldest mention of the name China anywhere in any literature. And this was not something that we need to we have to push hard, because the Chinese, unlike the Western historian, Chinese always credit Bharatavarsha as the source of their civilization. So there is no big deal in that.
Okay, thank you very much. And it has been very educational, and I'm sure almost that most people gained by it. And hopefully we will continue the talks further in this direction. And with that, I would like to express my gratitude and thank you, and namaskar to everyone.